What's up, guys? Metal571 here, and today I'm going to be talking about the fairly new Audeze Mobius headphones. So, this is a Bluetooth slash USB slash wired, closed back, planar magnetic, gaming, and audiophile headset. That's actually what I have in my notes because it really does do quite a lot of different things in one package, which is probably its biggest strength. It's using 100 millimeter Uniforce planar diaphragms, and it has the phaser array and fluxor magnet. So pretty much all the Audeze tech is here in a closed back design. So for build quality, this, you're not going to get the same build quality as an LCD headphone, of course. I mean, that probably won't be too surprising. At the moment, this is going for $399. I believe when it was first up for crowdfunding, which I believe is how this kind of started, it was around $250, which is a good price, but I'll elaborate a little bit more on that throughout the review. But for that price, it still feels kind of plasticky. There's a lot of soft touch materials. It's nice, and there's a lot of use of fake leather. So if you're vegan, you can definitely buy this thing. It won't be a problem. As far as I know, the top headband is also fake leather. It feels the same as the ear pad material. So, but pleather has never really been a big issue for me. But it does make your ears sweat a little bit over long periods of time. But still, as I've said for some other headphones, I wouldn't sit on it. I would not accidentally sit on this thing. I mean, you can kind of see that kind of flops around a little bit there. I'm not even sure, actually, if the headband has metal in it, because all I feel here is plastic on these hinges and whatnot. So I would be a little more careful for this thing. And I think you're paying more for the feature set here than the bulletproof build quality or something like that. So it comes with a bunch of stuff. This is not my typical headphone I review, and it's actually not a typical headphone at all from Audeze, which is more of an audiophile, if you're not familiar. American Audiophile planar magnetic technology company. This is a gaming headset. Marketing wise, it does do a lot of different things, however, so that's why it needs a bunch of accessories, one of which is a USB Type-C to Type-C cable. So I have tried this onto my Pixel 2 XL. It does not seem to work as a data cable. I do know that it works as a charging cable, and I'm assuming that it works with a Mac, like the new MacBooks have Type-C. And because this does connect through USB, since it has a built-in amplifier, actually balanced amp, inside the headphone itself. But if you have a MacBook and you have a Mobius, let me know, and I'll make the correction in the comments if it doesn't work like that. For most people, you're going to be using a USB-A to Type-C cable, which is included as well. And there's also a 3.5 millimeter TRRS. I always get that confused. So, that's got 4 conductors for the mic, combination of the mic and stereo for the headphones. So you can use that as a line in. And so you have all of those accessories, and of course a detachable microphone. Like I said, this is a headset, not even just a headphone. And I'll be testing that in a separate video. Actually, if you guys are interested in the mic test, let me know. I wasn't actually planning on doing that, but if you want to hear what the mic sounds like, I can certainly make you a little video for that. But I'm not gonna do that in this review here. Also, you can add this headphone case for $39, which actually is pretty nice. I mean, it works well. It's funny. I have another Audeze case. Where is it? Back there for my EL8 closed. That I'm actually selling right now still. Can't find a buyer yet, but working on it. And this one is nice because, the zipper is a lot better, hilariously enough, than the standard Audeze EL8 case. For some reason, the zipper on that one snags a bit more. So that's good. It's like it's a hard shell, but, it's slightly pliable. Decent case, $39 as an accessory. There is also a headphone stand they sell for $24. I don't have that here with me though. So getting into some of the features of this thing, well, along with the accessories, I don't normally do this because, most headphones I reviewed are not so techy, but this one's got a lot of buttons. So I'm going to tell you what they all do. First of all, there's the power button on the side here. So a single click on that will pause or play audio if you're connected via, I think, USB or Bluetooth. I did not test this with 3.5 millimeter. It might work with that too, because my phone doesn't have a headphone jack. This is 2018, so I don't know for sure if it'll work through that, but I assume it will, because it is possible to do that with an inline button. It'll also answer or end a call with this power button here if you're in Bluetooth mode. If you double click it, it will start Bluetooth pairing so that you can add this Bluetooth device to connect to whatever, your laptop or your phone. If you long press it for 3 seconds, it will power on the Audeze Mobius, which actually I'll do now. There it goes. Takes a little bit. And if you long press it, it'll also reject an incoming call. And if you long press it for 5 seconds, it'll power off. Yeah, and it has this little voice inside of it that lets you know what's going on. It also makes some interesting noises when it pairs successfully with Bluetooth, or if there's an incoming call and whatnot, or the call ends. It's got all the sounds you need to let you know what's going on when you're connected to a phone and on the go, for example. So that's the power button. It's got a lot of functionality in one button already. The 3D button over here, because this headphone has virtual surround built into it as well, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second here. A single click of this will center the 3D audio image. So the 3D audio image is around you, and as you move your head, this thing has a head tracking device inside of it that will keep the center of your audio in one place as you move your head. So you can recenter it by tapping that once. A double click will change the source mode, so you can switch between USB, Bluetooth, and aux. Aux being the 3.5 millimeter line in, using that button. I don't know why they put that on the 3D, but that's what it does. A long press on the 3D button will change your 3D audio mode, or 3D audio mode. So you got auto, which is good for on the go. Auto 3D mode like kind of slowly recenters you. So if you're like walking and you want some immersive kind of soundstage sound field, that will automatically recenter slowly as you move, as far as I've in my experience. When 3D is off, it acts as a standard stereo headphone, and when it's on manual, that means that it keeps a set 3D centered image, so that as you move your head, it stays in one place all the time. And then we get to the next port is the microphone port in here, so you can plug in your mic as it comes out the front here. Actually, this is it right here. It comes right in, and it's keyed, so you can't put it in the wrong way. And this does bend, of course, quite a bit, so you can position it where you need it to be. Then we have the USB Type-C input here. So this is for charging, and it's also the same input you use for the USB-A to Type-C cable I was talking about before, to use it as a USB headset. And then so that's that one. And the next port is this one, which is not labeled, strangely, but this one is for the 3.5 millimeter line-in cable and microphone combined in that one. So apparently, some people have a mistake of plugging which is easy to do actually, the microphone into this line-in jack. I don't think you'll damage anything, but that's not where it goes. It goes in the one toward the front. Next, we have the microphone volume wheel back here. And the microphone volume wheel, if you scroll it, changes the mic volume. If you single click and then scroll once, that changes the EQ preset. So there's a couple of built-in EQ presets with the DSP in the headphone, which I will talk about a little bit. And if you long press this it changes the audio mode. So when you're wired on USB, you get a couple different modes. You can do stereo 2-channel, you can do high res 2-channel, which is a 96 kilohertz 24-bit mode, and you have a 7.1 channel mode, so that you can feed the headset up to 7.1 channels of surround from like a game, for example, and it will use its 3D head related transfer function built in DSP to simulate a sound field for you. And then there's the headphone volume wheel. And of course, scrolling the headphone volume wheel does what you would expect, changes the audio volume. If you single click it and then scroll once, it will change the song forward or backward. And finally, if you double click it, it will link back to the last Bluetooth host device that you connected to. And then finally, there's a mic mute switch up here. So you just toggle it and it will mute or unmute the mic. So yeah, there's a lot going on here. Of course, that takes up a large part of the review, just explaining what this stuff does. But if you ever need to refer to it, and I'm sure you will, it does come with a card, which is actually what I was reading off of there for quick reference, so you can figure out how this thing works. I'm sure that over time, all that functionality you will memorize if you use it often. Now, next up, that was pretty much the accessories and the build quality. Now I'm going to talk about the comfort. Now for me, this one was a little clampy out of the box. So, but it does loosen up with time. You can see how it sits like this. Now when I took it out first, I think it was more compressed, but as I wore it, it started to stretch, especially if you have a big head like me. And kind of like an HD 600 actually, it'll stretch a bit and then it will become fairly comfortable. I didn't find I had any problem once it stretched out. The pads here are memory foam pleather, as I was talking about earlier. And, you know, as such, if you're in a warm room, your ears can get a little bit sweaty with long-term use. But, you know, if that doesn't bother you very much, it is pretty comfortable because they're pretty deep. And I don't have any problems with my ears touching the inside of them. So there's plenty of ear cup room there. Now, I'll talk about the 3D experience here. So as I was talking about earlier, there's a 3D audio, 3D auto, 3D manual, and just stereo mode. Now, when you're using 3D auto or 3D manual, which just refers to how the centering is done, what you can do, and what I did to test this, because I don't really play games anymore because my wrist, which is still recovering, maybe next year, but I watched some Netflix, and if you don't know, the Netflix app on Windows actually outputs 5.1. And that goes to this headphone, and it interprets it, and it will create a virtual surround field around you. So basically, it's kind of like having a home theater, a personal home theater in your head, and it does work pretty well. I've used, some of you know that because I used to game so much, I actually am quite familiar with virtual surround. I used to have an X-Fi I used all the time, and then eventually a Zonar DG, where I would use Dolby headphone, I think it was, to virtually position channels around my head. But the difference with this is that as you move your head around, you can hear that the virtual center channel and the virtual speakers stay in place as you move your head around. So if you're looking for like a specific sound in an environment, you can go looking for it with your head and you can center it, which is pretty interesting. It's kind of a big gimmick when we're talking about music, because music's only stereo, so it doesn't really matter. It's kind of like sounding like speakers in front of you, playing at you, and you're moving your head around and you can hear the speakers stay stationary. So actually I usually shut it off, when using it with music. But if you're watching something on Netflix, or you're playing a game that'll output 5.1 at 7.1, then the 3D mode is useful, actually 3D manual, where you can look forward and then click the 3D button that centers the image in front of you, and then as you look around it stays put. But, however, I want to say something that I don't think too many other reviewers are going to pick up on, because I've done a lot of virtual surround testing in the past, and that's that the way games are moving now, you may be aware, is Dolby Atmos is being built into a lot of them. So actually a lot of the DSP that this headphone does for you, other than the head tracking, is already done by the game for many games. So yeah, Dolby Atmos is an example. Dolby Atmos is basically an object-based surround, which means that if the plane's over there, then take whatever sound system you have, 22 channels or 2 channels on a headphone, and make it sound like it's coming from that direction. And so that's what a lot of games have built in. In that case, you'd want to disable all this 3D stuff completely on this headphone and just use the virtual Dolby Surround or the Dolby Atmos built into the game. That's something that you have to keep in mind, because if you try to combine Atmos with the 3D processing here, it doesn't make any sense. If the game has a headphone mode, just set this thing to stereo and just use it, and it should be fine. So, equalizers. There's a couple different equalizers built in here, but some of them are a little confusing. So I've already read the manual for you, so you don't have to get so confused about it. The main ones that I'm interested in, because this is more of an audiophile perspective review rather than a gaming review, is flat, default, and music. So flat EQ actually refers to, we're not equalizing the headphone flat, but rather the EQ itself is flat. So that means that there's no processing happening equalization-wise with the headphone. So the way to get this headphone to sound as if it was a passive headphone, is to set the EQ to flat and then set it to stereo mode and shut off 3D completely. And that's the natural sound of the drivers. And it's not the best. It's a little bit forward. I'll talk about the bass, middle, and treble and sound stages I usually do in a second here. But yeah, the flat EQ is a little bit aggressive, which means there's no EQ. Flat is no EQ. It's just weird. That confused me when I first got it too. The default EQ is an EQ applied that matches the Audeze house sound. So the Audeze house sound is basically a very Harmon-ish sound. And it definitely shows through here as being the most balanced of all the EQ settings. And then there's also a music EQ mode, which tilts the whole frequency response a little more towards the treble. Tilts it down in the treble, so it tilts it more towards the bass a little bit more. So if you want, to jam out to some bass-heavy music, or you want to bring up the bass in some mastered music that's not so bass-heavy, then yes, the music EQ would make sense. So, and there's also some like game genre specific EQs. I didn't play around with those so much, but the idea behind those is to emphasize, things in the game like gunshots in a first-person shooter. You want to emphasize that so that you can hear them more clearly. So there's a couple different EQs of that, but I'm not going to go over those in detail. I'll let the gaming guys do that stuff. And now that brings us to the sound overall here. Now the bass on this is very good. It's quite well extended. However, on music mode, I have to always talk about the sound here in reference to the built-in EQs, because that's what you're going to be using when you use this thing. The built-in EQs, the default sounds about right. The music EQ is a little elevated above what I would consider relatively neutral, and so that can get a little bit muddy, a little bit too bassy for some genres, especially like well-recorded music that isn't super lean and suffering from the loudness wars, which is a whole nother video. So yeah, the default EQ is probably what I would stick with for the most part for the bass, and it sounds really quite good. The mid-range, there's some haze, there's some minor ringing that I'm hearing here, centered somewhere around 4K if I had to guess, and I haven't seen this shown up on any measurements, but that's what I'm hearing with the upper mids. Other than that, the timbre's okay, but it's a little bit off timbre in the upper mids though, because of this 4K shout, and it's a little too forward. On flat, it's quite forward. On default EQ, it's still a little too forward for me. Like for example, for metal, is a little too aggressive in the electric guitars, and even with the music preset, which again, like I said earlier, tilts the sound balance towards the bass more and cuts a little bit more mid and treble, it's still a little bit forward. So that makes me think it might be more of a time domain problem at 4K. But other than that, pretty decent. I mean, it's nothing amazing, but the mids are working here. Maybe not. The sound quality overall, and I'll get to this in the conclusion again, is that it's not quite up to $400, but what you're paying for is more of the all-aroundness of what this headphone can do. But I'm getting ahead of myself anyway. The treble here, I think it's really good for a closed back, because it's never sibilant, it's never too forward, but if the recording has a lot of treble, you'll clearly hear it. So it's kind of more of a reference treble, or at least what I like to hear for a reference treble response. extends out into the air just fine. So really you're getting 20 hertz to 20K here quite nicely as far as I can tell. And what's nice about that is most gaming headsets are not even close to this sound quality, or at least this sound balance. And that's what's really cool about Mobius, is that it's really breaking ground here. I don't think there are too many headsets that sound this good. But it's been a while since I delved into that, but that's my guess. And again, yeah, no sibilance, no excessive brightness. The recording is bright, you'll hear it, but it won't be extremely in your face like a higher dynamic. Soundstage. Now this is kind of the Achilles heel, which might surprise you because I said the 3D abilities of the headphone were not too bad, but soundstage when this thing is in stereo mode is really not that great. I was pretty disappointed that the width and imaging is just not there. It's not there, and a lot of that is probably because this headphone was designed more to get a good frequency response out of it in a closed back rather than try to maximize soundstage in the closed back. And rather than doing that, naturally we're going to rely on the 3D HRTF simulation for the virtual surround instead. And so that's my guess. I may or may not be right, but that's what I'm hearing here. Not a great soundstage at all for the stereo image in general. Let's see. Isolation is very good, actually. I didn't have really any problems with isolation. As soon as you put it on, you can hear it gets much quieter. So I think you could get away with this at home with people in the same room. But again, it's still a full-size headphone, and as usual, you can't blast this thing in a library. People will still hear it. But it does what it's supposed to as a closed back. It has passive noise isolation. This does not have active noise cancellation like a Bose. Despite being a Bluetooth headphone like it is. Okay, now genre pairing. So generally, like I said, it sounds quite right down the middle for me, which is really amazing. That's why some of my really early impressions were very, very good. If you saw that on Twitter when I first heard this thing, I thought it was really well balanced. But upon further evaluation, of course, I had some issues with the mids. But that's it, which is really quite something. So really, this is kind of a jack of all trades if you're talking about music genre pairing. But I still think that the upper mids are a little bit forward. There's something going on at around 4K that hasn't shown up in graphs. And so if you're a metalhead, it may not be the best choice for that if you're sensitive to upper mid range like I am. Otherwise, though, sound balance is superb, and that's really saying something, because I normally have a lot more issues with just about any headphone I review, and this has some of the least issues in terms of sound balance that I've ever heard out of a headphone. But it doesn't get everything right, as I said. Soundstage, not so great. Detail is okay, but not enough for $400. Can't have it all. So amp needs. Now this is a weird situation because this headphone actually, as far as I can tell, does not run passively at all. You cannot just plug it into a headphone amp. It has its own amps built in, so really you're just feeding it a line in. So if you try to plug a headphone amp into this thing, and I actually tried, it really just functions as a line in. And at a certain point, once you start turning up the volume enough, it'll just clip the input. So there's no point. If you're using this with a computer, you just should just use it with USB, Bluetooth if you're using a phone. That would be my recommendation. You can still use it as a line in if you want to feed like your computer's sound card to it as a line input, but I wouldn't. I would just use USB and bypass that. So really, amp needs doesn't really exist because you already have the amp that you need for the volume that you need in here, and it gets plenty loud. Trust me, you'll be fine. Okay, so what does all this mean? What is my conclusion for this? So here's the big thing about Audeze Mobius, and that's that I like that this sound quality is being offered in a gaming-related device, because I don't think there's any headphones out there, or headsets I really should say, it's kind of what this is competing with, that's going to give you this kind of sound balance, and I think it's going to blow away people who have not entered this audiophile hobby that we all know and love and hate at the same time. And so that's a big takeaway and a big deal. However, I think that at $399, I'm not getting the sense that the sound quality here is up to par for $400. However, if you take into account the fact that this will do Bluetooth, it'll do a USB, it has built-in amps, The comfort's good, sound balance is good, the 3D DSP is really cool and actually fairly convincing as well. It does a lot of things well, but it's clearly not focusing on an audiophile stereo market as much as it is a gaming headset, which is really what it was marketed for to begin with. But I think this will blow away a lot of people, and if you're looking for gaming headsets which are notoriously overpriced already, this is not a bad choice. But I'm not sure I'd pay $400 for it. I'd say like probably $299 is a little bit more fair considering all the functionality it has, and that makes more sense. Like I was saying earlier, when it was $250 on pre-order, that seems like a really good price for something like this. I hope there will be a version 2.0. One of the problems I neglected to mention in the rest of this review is that there's some background hiss all the time in this thing. I thought Audeze had fixed that, and there was some second version of it. As far as I know, this is one of the newest revisions of the Mobius, so I'm not sure if something is wrong with this pair or if that's just the way they all are, because it has an active amp on board. But if you put the headphone on and it's off and you turn it on, you'll hear a slight background hiss all the time. It doesn't matter what volume you're at. It doesn't actually increase with volume either, unless you're like really, really loud setting. So that's a thing. So I hope they fixed that. I think the build quality, could be improved a bit more, or at least show me that there's metal in here. Maybe there is metal in the headband. I don't know for sure. It could be, but it feels plasticky. It's weighty, but amazingly, this is not that heavy for a planar magnetic. That's another thing that I didn't mention. And so I don't think people who don't know what a planar magnetic headphone even is will even notice because although it's heavier than most gaming headsets, it's surprisingly light for what it is. So those are the things I'd like to see, as well as, of course, a passive sound option. Let us audiophiles plug in direct. Let us EQ it the way we want. Give us the raw headphone response. No amps, shut the amps off. Just let us power it ourselves. That would be another thing I would add. And, of course, improve the soundstage because it's not that great. So that's the Audeze Mobius. Hope this helps you decide whether you want to buy one of these, and it's quite a unique offering within the Audeze line. And that's all I've got, guys. See you in the next review. Thanks.